Thomas Reed was a simple sailor with an honest heart. At 23 years old, he worked on merchant ships that traveled between coastal cities, delivering goods and carrying messages. Thomas had a gift for navigation and was well liked by his crew. His captain trusted him completely. Thomas was engaged to marry Sarah, a kind woman who worked at her father's bakery. They planned to wed in the spring. Thomas also had a close friend named Marcus, who worked alongside him on the ships. One winter day, their captain fell ill during a voyage. Before dying, he gave Thomas a sealed letter. "Deliver this to the address written on it," the captain whispered. "Tell no one," Thomas promised. He didn't know the letter contained information about a hidden fortune, gold coins buried on a remote island by pirates many years ago. But Marcus had watched this exchange. Jealous of Thomas's success and wanting Sarah for himself, Marcus made a terrible plan. He told the harbor authorities that Thomas was carrying secret messages for criminals. Marcus claimed Thomas was involved in smuggling. When the ship returned to port, soldiers arrested Thomas. They found the letter and, without investigating properly, declared him guilty. Thomas protested his innocence, but no one listened. Marcus testified against him, lying to the court. Even Sarah's father forbade her from seeing Thomas, believing the accusations. Thomas was sentenced to 20 years in prison on Fortune Island, a rocky fortress in the middle of the sea where the worst criminals were kept. Fortune Island was a place of despair. The prison stood on cliffs above crashing waves. Thomas was thrown into a small, dark cell with stone walls and one tiny window. He could hear the ocean but could barely see the sky. For the first year, Thomas felt his spirit breaking. He was innocent, yet no one would help him. He learned that Sarah, pressured by her father and deceived by Marcus's lies, had married Marcus instead. This news devastated Thomas. He stopped eating and wished for death. Then, one night, he heard a strange sound scratching coming from the wall of his cell. Someone was digging. Over several weeks, the sound continued. Finally, a small hole appeared, and through it came a voice. "Hello, friend. My name is Professor Edmund Gray." Professor Gray was an elderly man who had been imprisoned 15 years earlier. He was a scholar who had discovered evidence of corruption among powerful government officials. To silence him, they had falsely accused him of treason. The professor was brilliant. Despite being in prison, he had educated himself using memory and logic. He made ink from rust and soot, paper from cloth threads, and kept his mind sharp by solving mathematical problems. The two men talked through the hole each night. Professor Gray taught Thomas everything he knew: history, mathematics, science, languages, philosophy, and strategy. Thomas absorbed this knowledge like a sponge, transforming from a simple sailor into an educated man. One evening, Professor Gray shared his greatest secret. "Before my arrest, I discovered something remarkable. There's a fortune hidden on this very island, pirate gold buried in caves beneath the northern cliffs. I found old documents describing its location." He drew Thomas a map from memory, explaining every landmark and detail. "If you ever escape," the professor said, "find this treasure. Use it to reclaim your life." After 7 years of imprisonment, Professor Gray became ill. He was too old and weak to survive the harsh conditions. On his final night, he held Thomas's hand through the hole in the wall. "You must escape," the professor whispered. "Live the life I cannot. Use what I've taught you. Right the wrongs done to you, but don't let revenge poison your heart." The professor died that night. When the guards came to remove his body, they wrapped it in canvas and prepared to throw it into the sea, the island's custom for disposing of dead prisoners. Thomas realized this was his chance. That night, he worked desperately to widen the hole between their cells. He squeezed through, though the rough stone tore his skin. In the professor's cell, he removed the body from the canvas sack, whispered an apology and a prayer, then climbed inside the sack himself. The next morning, guards carried the sack to the cliffs and hurled it into the ocean, never knowing they had thrown a living man instead of a corpse. Thomas held his breath as he plunged into the freezing water. The weighted sack pulled him down, but he had hidden a small piece of sharp metal in his clothes. Underwater, lungs burning, he cut through the canvas and swam desperately toward the surface. He emerged gasping, far from the island. Using skills learned during his sailing days, he swam to a small rocky outcrop and rested. That night, he swam along the coast to the northern side of the island, found the caves the professor had described, and discovered the treasure chests filled with gold coins, jewels, and precious artifacts. Thomas took what he could carry and hid it carefully. Over several nights, he made a small raft from driftwood and sailed away from Fortune Island forever. Thomas reached the mainland and carefully sold small portions of the treasure. He created a new identity as Mr. Vincent Stone, a wealthy merchant who had made his fortune trading in distant lands. With his money and the education Professor Gray had given him, Thomas transformed himself. He wore fine clothes, spoke multiple languages, and moved in elite social circles. No one recognized the simple sailor he had once been. But Thomas had not forgotten. He learned that Marcus had used lies and manipulation to become a successful businessman, taking credit for Thomas's navigation skills and using Sarah's family bakery to build a commercial empire. Marcus was now wealthy and respected, while Sarah appeared unhappy in their marriage. Thomas also discovered that the official who had ordered his imprisonment without proper investigation had been bribed by Marcus's family to ensure the conviction. Mr. Vincent Stone began his careful plan. He didn't seek violent revenge, but justice and truth. First, he befriended Marcus in social settings, pretending to be a potential business partner. He learned that Marcus's businesses were actually failing, propped up only by debts and deception. Marcus owed money to dangerous people and had been stealing from investors. Thomas anonymously provided evidence of Marcus's fraud to the authorities and to the people Marcus had cheated. The truth emerged slowly but certainly. Marcus's reputation crumbled. His businesses collapsed. Investors demanded their money back. In his desperation, Marcus confessed everything to the stranger he thought was his friend Mr. Vincent Stone. Marcus admitted framing Thomas years ago, lying in court, and manipulating Sarah into marriage. "I was jealous," Marcus sobbed. "Thomas had everything: talent, respect, love. I wanted what he had." Thomas revealed his true identity. Marcus fell to his knees, begging forgiveness. "You stole 7 years of my life," Thomas said quietly. "You will face the legal consequences of your fraud. That is justice. As for forgiveness, I must learn if I'm capable of that." Thomas didn't use his wealth to destroy Marcus beyond the natural consequences of his crimes, but he ensured the truth was known. Sarah had divorced Marcus when his frauds came to light. She had lived in quiet unhappiness for years, always wondering about Thomas, always feeling something had been wrong about his conviction. When she learned the truth that Thomas was alive, had been innocent, and had suffered because of her husband's lies, she was devastated by guilt. Thomas visited her at the old bakery, which she now ran alone. She didn't recognize the wealthy, educated gentleman at first. When he revealed himself, she wept. "I should have believed in you," she said. "I should have waited. I'm so sorry." Thomas felt a strange emotion. He had imagined this moment for years, had thought he wanted her to suffer as he had suffered, but seeing her genuine remorse and pain, he felt only sadness for both of them, for the life they might have had. "We were young," he said gently. "You were pressured by your father. You believed what you were told. I understand. Can you forgive me?" she asked. "Yes," Thomas said, surprising himself. "Holding on to bitterness only imprisons me again. You're forgiven." But Thomas knew they couldn't reclaim what was lost. Too much time had passed. They were different people now. Thomas used his fortune to help others. He established a fund to investigate wrongful convictions and help innocent people imprisoned by corrupt systems. He donated to schools and libraries, remembering how education had saved him. He helped sailors and their families, never forgetting where he came from. The corrupt official who had enabled his false imprisonment was exposed and removed from office. Thomas ensured this happened through legal channels, not personal revenge. He also commissioned a memorial to Professor Edmund Gray, honoring the teacher who had given him a second life. One day, Thomas met Elena, a teacher who worked with poor children in the city. She knew nothing of his past but was drawn to his kindness and his passion for justice and education. Slowly, carefully, Thomas allowed himself to trust again, to hope again. He told Elena everything about his imprisonment, his escape, his revenge and his choice to move beyond it. "You could have become bitter and cruel," Elena said. "Instead, you chose to become generous and just. That's true strength." Thomas realized that his greatest victory wasn't the treasure he'd found or the justice he'd achieved. It was reclaiming his own humanity after years of suffering and injustice. Years later, Thomas stood on a cliff overlooking the sea. Fortune Island was visible in the distance. He thought of the young sailor he'd been, the prisoner he'd become, and the man he'd chosen to be. Professor Gray had told him not to let revenge poison his heart. Thomas had learned that justice and revenge were not the same thing. Justice sought truth and fairness. Revenge sought only pain. He had reclaimed his name, cleared his reputation, and found love with Elena. They had built a life of meaning and purpose together. Thomas Reed had learned that the greatest treasure wasn't gold buried in caves. It was the freedom to choose who you become, even after the world has tried to destroy you. The greatest prison wasn't made of stone walls and iron bars. It was hatred, bitterness, and the inability to forgive. And the greatest escape wasn't from an island fortress, it was from the desire for vengeance that could consume your soul. Thomas was finally completely free.